We'll start the meeting. Can I welcome everyone to this meeting of North and East Plan Panel. My name is Javed Akhtar, local councillor for London and Woodhouse, and I will be chairing today's meeting. Could I remind everyone that today's meeting is being live streamed on the City Council's YouTube channel so that the public can observe the minute without needing to be present. North and East Plan Panel deals with applications from the north, east, and the east of the city. The aim of the panel is to hear all the relevant information from applicants, members of the public, and council officers to help members of the panel make their decision. Could I now invite members and officers to introduce themselves and mute your microphone once you have introduced yourself? If we could start from the left, David.
Thank you, Chair. My name is David Newbury. I'm the lead planning officer for the plans panel, and I'll also be presenting the item this afternoon. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Brannan, highways officer.
Good afternoon. I'm Emma Flint, councillor in Wheatwood.
Good afternoon. I'm Councillor Morel Midgley, Paxton-Methley Ward.
Good afternoon. I'm Councillor David Jenkins from Kilneback and Sixth Ward.
Good afternoon. I'm Councillor Nicole Sharp from the Temple News and Ward.
Good afternoon. I'm Councillor Paul Ray from Hunslet and Riverside Ward.
Good afternoon. I'm Councillor Taylor from Chapel Allerton Ward, and I'm subbing today. I can't remember who I'm subbing for, but I'm subbing for someone.
Good afternoon. My name's Lewis Whittaker, Senior Technical Officer, and I'll be in charge of the PowerPoint today.
Hello, Ryan Stevenson, representing the Harewood Ward.
Good afternoon, everyone. Councillor Alan Lamb, representing the Wetherby Ward.
Good afternoon. Councillor Barry Anderson, Adeline Wharfdale Ward.
Good afternoon. Debbie Oldham. I'm the clerk to the panel.
Good afternoon. Nikki Dio, legal advisor to the panel.
Good afternoon. Jonathan Carr, Head of Development Management.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone, once again. Now, before I start the meeting, I think it's important to bring it to your attention. We've only got one item on the agenda. Now, I wanted this to be discussed, even though there was only one, but I did say at that time that I will put this to the members in future. If there's only one item, are you happy with that, or should we have more than one item for the plan meeting? So I'll take 1 minute of your time. If you agree with it in the future as well, if there's only one plan, or should we wait for a following month, if you can understand, rather than having a meeting? So I'll put you as members, and then obviously make it'll be interesting to hear from your points of view. Yes,
I think I'm happy to trust your judgment, Chair. There's been occasions where we've come for one item that clearly was going to take 5 or 10 minutes. And that seems like a bit of a waste of everybody's time. But there are other occasions when actually it's an item that it's here for a reason, it needs discussing. And I think it's better to do this than try and pack 6 things in and then curtail debates down the line and keep things moving. But I'm more than happy to trust in your judgment, Chair.
Are we all happy with that? Yeah. Thank you. Right. Moving on to the agenda, could I ask the clerk to go through agenda item number 1 to 5, please?
Thank you, Chair. Under agenda item number 1, there are no appeals against the refusal inspection of documents. Agenda item 2, there are no items which require the exclusion of the press or the public. Agenda item 3, there are no late items of business. Agenda item 4, could I ask members to declare any interests? I'll take silence as there are none. Under agenda item 5, apologies have been received from Councillor Bithell, and Councillor Taylor is present as her substitute. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and also welcome Councillor Eileen Taylor on this plan as well. Item 6, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 30th of June 2022. Do members accept these minutes are true and correct record? Thank you. Are there any matters arising? No, thank you. Item 7, David, I think you'll be presenting this.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. It's an application for 8 houses on the site of a former co-op car park off Arkwell Mountain in Roundhay. Just before we go into the report, there are a few corrections and updates to the report, and I'll deal with those now if I may. There are some sort of minor clarifications to the report. First off, I'll just list them off, but first one is paragraph 6, page 21. It should read Roundhay Conservation Area. That should be the reference rather than the Gledhow Valley Conservation Area. A point of clarification at paragraph 9, page 21, where that paragraph talks about the external materials to be used on the proposal. It mentions stone. I should clarify the proposal is for artificial stone as opposed to natural stone. Paragraph 11, page 22, talks about additional tree planting, deals with the issues of tree loss and tree planting. There it says that there are 9 additional new trees or additional trees to be planted. In actuality, there are actually 131 new trees, but I'll explain that a little bit because it's not quite as dramatic as it sounds. There are 31 extra heavy standard trees. Those are trees which are generally around about 4 to 4.5 meters in height when planted, and they're either planted in groups or individually around the site. So that is a substantial bit of planting, 31 new trees. But there is also a strip of planting proposed behind the houses that's shown on the landscaping plan. And when we get to the landscaping plan, I can highlight that for you. And there are 100 trees to be planted within there. Now it's anticipated that there'll be a rate of attrition of those trees and that the strongest ones will, you know, flourish, but there will be, it won't be that 100 trees will grow in that location. There will be some attrition and it'll be a far lesser number of trees that will grow. But I'll highlight that strip of planting when we come to it. And again, paragraph 73 and page 32 talks about 9 trees, and it should be a reference to a larger number. Since the report was written, we've received 3 further representations. I'll just very briefly summarize the points that have been raised. One representation is critical of the report because at times it refers to Oakwood Mount and it should be Oakwell Mount, so apologies for that. They make a representation that 8 houses is too many for the site. They doubt that the landscaping that is proposed will be carried out. They consider that the highways concerns raised by local residents have not been adequately addressed. And there is a question mark raised by one resident whether there's enough space to accommodate the proposed parking. We've also received a representation which has just come onto the system this morning. And I'll just briefly go through this. It points out that in the site and surroundings, it's a critique of the report in the main. It points out in the site and surroundings that no mentions made of the fact that plot 6 was a plot for the 6th house and sold by the developer to Safeway. I don't fully understand that comment, but this has been submitted by the speaker, so if members have a question, they can ask the speaker that. This isn't the objective to the application. They note that the site access is only overgrown because of the neglect of the present owners. That they raise a query in terms of the flood risk management response of no objection, because that was submitted in November 2021. But since then, the access road has been redesigned to adoptable standards, and whether that has an implication for the drainage. They go on to refute the planning officer's statement in the report that the site is tucked away. They point out that you can see it from residential properties that surround the site, commercial properties on some of the commercial properties in the car park on Roundhay Road, the Home Bargains car park. And they say that a 10.4 metre high dwelling is a dominant dwelling. So they disagree with the officer's conclusion that it's not a dominant dwelling. They ask that it should plans panel approve this application, that a commuted sum be imposed on the developer to cover future repair costs and maintenance of systems such as existing drainage, which will be affected by, such as the access road, if adopted. And I'll come on to that when we go through the slides. I'll just talk through that issue because it is an important issue for local residents. Again, they point to the dwelling's height of 10.4 metres and say that's very high. They question that this planning application, we did not consult with our nature conservation officer. They point out on the previous application for 49 apartments, which is referenced in the report, which was refused, we did consult with the nature conservation officer, and they question why we haven't done that this time and come to the conclusion that we think there'll be a biodiversity benefit. There is a very simple explanation for that, and I think looking at the timings of it, unfortunately, we relied on one nature conservation officer. At the time this application was submitted, we only had one nature conservation officer. And unfortunately, that officer was off for an elongated period of sick leave. They've since returned to the office, but it simply didn't consult with them because we didn't have someone to consult with. So that's the explanation behind that. They support the Civic Trust's objection to the application. They consider that a wider tree survey is essential and should have been carried out to have a look at neighbouring trees. They point out that the gardens of the proposed dwellings do slope up in places, and they say they'll be unusable. Obviously, the officers have come to a different view. They pick up on the point of the Japanese knotweed and say that there is a set legal process which people need to go to get rid of Japanese knotweed and make sure that the site is not infested with it. I should explain that any planning permission that is granted on the site that has Japanese knotweed doesn't override any other legal processes that need to be gone through to deal with that infestation. The two sit side by side, as it were. They raise concerns about the access road, and I'll come on to this, and the amount of land that is going to be excavated to create that road and how that is going to be dealt with. And they raise the concern that they've got drainage which runs underneath the access road and the implications that will have about that. And then just the general point about the noise and disturbance that will happen during the construction of the site, where this site to be developed, and the amount of land that would have to be taken away, debris as it were, soil and debris that would have to be taken away, and the impact that would have on residential amenity. So I'll go through the presentation now, and hopefully this will, and I'll talk through some of those points as we deal with that. So we can have the first slide, please, Lewis. So here we have an aerial shot of the site. This is taken from the south, so we're looking from south to north. I'll identify the extent of the site, starting off with the access road. The proposed access comes through here, and the site incorporates that area of vacant car park and the bank of trees which runs to the rear of it. So it's roughly that line there. So you've got the Home Bargains store and car park in here. Then this is the vacant bit of car park, which is the main body of the application site. And then you've got these trees which are also within the application site there. And the proposed access comes between number 29 and number 31, Oakwell Mount there. There is the Home Bargains store is actually accessed off Roundhay Road or off Fitzroy Drive up here, through there and in there. So that access will remain and will be unaffected by the proposal. And as you can see, it's very close to Roundhay Road and all the shops and facilities on Roundhay Road. And then it's surrounded by the wider residential area of Oakwood and Roundhay. So next slide, please. So sorry, next slide, please, Liz. Thanks. Right, we've now got a series of photos just of the site. This first one is taken from Oakwell Mount. You'll see number 31 there. That's number 29, and this is where the proposed access will go. So it will go through that part of the site there, and it leads into the car park is out the back there. Next slide, please, Lewis. This is just another view of that access. Should point out there are a couple of TPO trees, protected trees here, and these are the two trees that would be removed as part of the proposal. So there's an ash and a sycamore, and you'll see on the report that the landscape officer, in light of the condition of those trees, the health of those trees, isn't raising an objection to the removal of those trees. Next slide, please, Liz. Again, this is looking across the front of the access towards number 29. You see the trees there. It's difficult to distinguish trunks because they are covered in ivy. And this is a view of the base of a sycamore tree, the trunk of a sycamore tree, which is actually in the front garden of number 29 Oakwell Mount. So this is to the left-hand side of the access. This tree, it's proposed, will remain. Okay, next slide, please. And this is now we're looking from the north of the site, from Gledhow Rise to its junction from Fitzroy Drive, and you can see there the back of some residential properties. Sorry, some commercial residential properties that front onto Roundhay Road. And this access road leads into, there's Home Bargains there, and to the car park of Home Bargains behind it. Next slide, please, Liz. And this is just us moving down into the road. You've got Home Bargains building on the left-hand side, doctor's surgery, GP surgery on the right. There's the Home Bargains car park. And then in the background, you'll see the fence and the bank of trees and the lights, and they form part of the application site as it stands at the current time. And now we're in the application site itself. We're looking from north to south on this slide. So when we get to it, it'll be plot 7 and 8. This is around about the site of plot 7 and 8. So you've got the current palisade fencing to the Home Bargains site. You've got the various lights and hard standing you see. Got the properties of Oakwell Mount, numbers, it's probably 20, 29 and 27A, I think, are there. And then you can see the trees as they rise up at the back of the site. And this is just a further view, just a little bit further up on the site, having a look at the bank of the trees. And again, you can see properties of Oakwell Mount in the distance there. And again, more internal views of the site. This one actually shows where the proposed access point. So the access point would come in at this point here. And it is important to note, in light of some of the representations I read out there about the concerns of residents, that access road, you can probably just make out from that photo, is the land is actually at a higher level than the car parks that exist at the moment. So there will need to be quite a bit of excavation to create a suitable road of suitable gradient to get into the site. And that's where some of the concerns come from local residents about services that run under that road and the implication that that would have for those services. Now, normally in the world of planning, we wouldn't normally get involved in that because it's dealt with in other ways. Through the adoption of the road, and it is proposed to adopt the internal road layout, the section 38 agreement would normally deal with the technicalities of how existing services are arranged, just to protect those services, to make sure that no one's interests are actually prejudiced. So that would be the normal course of events as how these matters would be dealt with. And ordinarily planning wouldn't get involved in that simply because there is a process to go through. Okay, next slide, please, Liz. And here we're looking across, this is taken from, it would be the southwest corner of the site, looking out across. It's looking out across in effect where plots 1 and 2 would be sited. And you can see how the land rises at the back there, and you see the very mature trees at the back, and there's more sort of scrub land at the front there. Okay, slide please. And here we are, just moving a little bit further around, looking back towards the back of the Home Bargains site and the car park. I should say the whole of this application site is actually located within the designated identified town centre. And I did mention earlier that we've got the conservation area name wrong. The conservation area boundary is actually over here beyond the fence. So none of the site actually falls within the conservation area. Right, so this is the proposed layout. So there's Oakwell Mount and the existing residential properties of Oakwell Mount. You've got Fitzroy Drive up here to the west. So the proposed access off Oakwell Mount, they're the group of trees that are referred to. There are 3 trees there. So the 2 trees on the applicant's application side come out. That's the sycamore and the ash tree. So it runs between number 29 and number 31. There's the access road. Do have some slides later on, which I'll very briefly flick through, that just show vehicles, refuse vehicles and the like can go in and turn around adequately. And then we have 4 pairs of semi-detached houses. You see the front of the houses face out towards the car park. Apart from 7 and 8, we look out down the access road there. And then the rear look out across towards the rising land and the woodland. It's difficult to make out on this slide, but we'll probably pick it up with the landscaping slide later on. But each of these properties has quite extensive gardens that stretch well up into the woodland, right onto the boundary of the properties to the rear here. And this just points out the extent of the road to be adopted. Here are the elevations of the properties. You can see they're described in the report, I think, at various times as 2.5 story, but I think it's fair to say you can see elements of them. And this is plots 1 and 2. That's, to all intents and purposes, a 3-story building. Arguably, that's a 2.5 story building. In terms of the layout, the ground floor each comprises kitchen and eating areas. When you get onto the first floor, plot 1 has a lounge at the back there with a Juliet style balcony, which you can see there. And that will face out towards their back garden, but they've got a lounge there. Then they've got a home office and 1 bedroom, whereas plot 2 has a bigger bedroom. And this sort of layout is replicated through the site. And plot 2 has, again, a first floor lounge. So all the plots will have eating and kitchen facilities are ground floor, and then first floor, it's a mixture of a bedroom and habitable accommodation, such as a lounge, as it were. And then on the second floor, into the roof space, we've got a couple more bedrooms. So all of the properties are 3-bedroom properties. Go on to the next slide, please. And this is plots 3 and 4. So you see it's more of the same. What I'll point out on here, when you start looking at some of the architectural detailing, it is very traditional. That ground floor is where the artificial stone is. And then you've got render above with some sort of timber boarding detailing going on there. So in many ways, you know, it's quite round-ish, I would say, in terms of their architectural style. That has picked up quite a few of the architectural details from the wider area. Next slide, please. And this will be 4 and 5. And then if you go on to the next one, please. And this is 7 and 8, which are at the bottom of the road. You'll see on each pair, one of the pair has a garage. They also have 2 surface car parking spaces. So one of the pairs has a garage and 2 surface car parking spaces. The other ones have 2 surface parking spaces. So all of these properties have at least 2 car parking spaces. And there are 4 visitor spaces also provided for, which I'll pick up when we get onto the landscaping plan. Okay, next slide, please, Lewis. Oh, and as if by magic, here's the landscaping plan. So the thing to point out here, they're the trees which are going. Then I talked about the 31 extra heavy standard trees which are going to go in. So we have groups of them there, and then you'll see these individual trees just identified along there. That bank of 100 or so whip trees, if I can call it that, they're located in this shaded or hatched area here. So as I say, a lot of those will probably fail over time, but it's there to accentuate, I suppose, or emphasize or complement the mature trees at the back, which are retained, the large trees at the back, which are retained. And here you can see the gardens are more closely defined. So if you look at plot 2, you can see that the garden stretches into the back there. Same with plot 3. Plot 1 has that wider area. Plot 4, plot 5, and plot 6 all stretch linear gardens stretching into the back. Then plot 7 has a wider garden in there, and plot 8 has a more narrow linear garden which stretches up there. So you can see a lot of the garden is actually dominated by the retained trees. So you do have this mixture of a little bit of open space, but then the retained trees. And we'll see this later on. You'll see how the slope rises up as well. It is quite a difficult site in that way to make use. But what you can see here also is that lighter area where you see the plot numbers, that more or less identifies where the flat area of a garden is immediately out the back of the properties. In terms of the home bargains, car park boundary treatment, there'll be a fence, but there's also going to be, apart from the trees, a hedge line introduced along there, just to soften the visual impact of that. And that's where the visitor car parking is located. See 3 spaces there, and there's a space there as well. And then those coloured sides are just examples of the wild planting that will take place in amongst the woodland area to supplement that. Okay, next slide, please, Liz. And this is just a slide really, but just to demonstrate that larger vehicles could get in for servicing and delivery purposes. That's been checked out. I suspect the next slide as well shows very similar. Yeah. I would just point out, you see those little dots. Sorry, I'm a little bit colorblind, so they look green or brown to me. But those dots, they indicate the electric. Each property has an electric vehicle charging point, and they indicate that. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, I think we've probably covered most of that. So next slide, please. Right. Yeah, this is the point about the gardens and the slope of the land. Now, this is the most recent plan we have, but it doesn't actually accurately reflect the layout plan that's currently before us, but it's still a useful slide to have. This actually shows 9 properties on the site, and we did negotiate down from 9 to 8 properties. But you'll see at various points through plot A, plot C there, plot A there, or house type A there, and B there, various lines through, and they relate to these cross sections that appear there. And I'll just talk you through the detail because there's no scale on that. So this top one here relates to plot 1. So that in effect is the front of plot 1. That's the house, that bit there. That's the back of plot 1. That dark line moving up there from the back is the existing ground level. So what they're proposing to do is excavate that area out to create a flat area. Then there would be, and then that would remain as is at the present time, and that would have the benefit of protecting the tree roots, etc., and not disturbing them. But it does mean that's the only flat area of the garden, and then there'd be steps that would lead up into the wooded area at the back of the property. So that distance from there to there at the back, the flat area, is just over 7 meters. And then there would be a retaining wall there, and that's the largest of the retaining structures in terms of its height. That's actually quite tall. That's going to be about 3 meters high. When you move on to the second plot that we're looking at, which in effect, in terms of our current scheme before us, is plots 3 and 4. You see there's no actual retaining structure there. There's only a very minor alteration to the levels in that area there. And they will get around about 9.5 meters or so before the land starts to rise. And then here, which for the purposes, which is here, it's a cross section through there. That's for our purposes, plots 5 and 6. Again, you can see that dark line. That bit there is going to be removed. And there'll be a flat area there at the back of plots 5 and 6. And that's, when you look at the distance of that, that's just under, well, it'll be in the area of 9 meters there, and a retaining wall of just over 2 meters, about 2.3 meters, that retaining wall. So still quite a substantial retaining wall. And then when you move to the end of the site, the northern end, plots 7 and 8, this is where they actually had the smallest flat area out the back. We're looking at an area of only around about 2.5 meters, which is genuinely flat behind the back of those properties. It will vary. It might be slightly, it'll be probably slightly bigger on behind plot A, but at its tightest, it's 2.5 meters. But in terms of retaining wall, because there's only a very little bit of the slope which is going to come out, it's only a retaining wall of just over 1 meter. So, and then, which probably about that point there, and then you rise up into the woodland. So in effect, that's one of the unusual features of this scheme, is that the gardens do incorporate the woodland, and it's going to be a particular sort of person, I guess, who wants to have that sort of wooded area to the rear of their property. But it's a feature of the development, and people will know what they're buying into. And it has been carefully designed so that the creation of the flat areas doesn't encroach on the root protection areas of the trees themselves. So, right, oh, we've only got past the slide. I think this is probably the last slide, but it's there really just to demonstrate just the landscaping scheme. So now that we've put it all together in terms of talking it through, this is hopefully that slide makes a little bit more sense. Can I just double check? Is that the last slide, Liz? Yeah. So obviously it is a difficult site to deal with. It doesn't have any particular sensitivities in terms of policy designation. There's nothing which counts against the principle of the development, but there are issues with this site that members will need to consider. Relationship to existing residential properties, for example, the issue of the trees, issues around about the future amenities of the occupiers. I should say it's set out in the report that in terms of sizes of rooms, it meets our standards. In terms of degrees of separation to existing residential properties, it's well in excess of our standards. In terms of matters such as parking, again, it meets our guidelines. But this site does have some interesting and challenging aspects to it. One of the aspects is the creation of the access road, which goes between two properties. That's matters for members to consider. I would say in terms of the concerns of local residents, and these are perfectly understandable concerns about their drainage system, for example, that would be dealt with by other ways. But those residents do have a concern about the impact it will have, the excavation works, on the stability of their properties. And we do have a condition in there which requires a pre-commencement survey and then any remedial works that need to be done whilst the work is being carried out in terms of retaining structures and etc. So that's it, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. We have a speaker who objects to the application. Could I invite them to come onto the top table, please? When you're ready, you will have 4 minutes to address the panel. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the neighbours in the Oakwells who have made objective comments to this proposal. There's no time really to talk about our concerns: flood risk management, the adoption of the access road, protection of existing drains and structures during constructions, and highways matters. I will try in this short time to make the case that the proposed development is not appropriate. 2 of the planning authority's documents help me here. The first is the planning authority's reason for the rejection of the previous application on this site to build a block of retirement living apartments. I can list these reasons now and enlarge on them if you wish. All these reasons apply to the current application. They are: poor design and overdevelopment of the site. 2, impact on trees. 3, lack of affordable housing provision, although I know that this is not a reason for refusal, it is still true. 4, the lack of green space provision. The impermeable area has increased since the earlier designs and the gardens will slope very steeply. 5, impact on the neighbours' amenity by way of dominance. At 10.4 metres, the proposed dwellings are much higher than the neighbouring houses around them and will be overbearing, particularly to number 29. 6, the poor level of amenity afforded to future occupants. Again, this is described in by the Civic Trust with regard to the small kitchen areas. In 4 of the houses, the kitchens are barely twice as large as the walk-in wardrobes. Poor amenity includes a lack of sufficient outdoor private amenity space. The gardens are largely inaccessible due to the acute angle of the embankment. There is a poor level of outlook over a supermarket car park and the trucks at the loading bay. 7, failure to comply with climate change policies. Not just the lack of potential for solar panels as identified by the Civic Trust. The designs of the roofs of the dwellings reduces the potential for solar collection areas with their dormers and shape. The planning officer's report says an acceptable biodiversity assessment has been carried out, but this has not been loaded on the planning portal. It's hard to believe that the felling of dozens of trees during the nesting season in April 2021, the loss of 2 mature trees outside the site, the further loss of flora and fauna by the site clearance, and the silver birch, which was conditioned several years ago by the planning authority but was never planted. And then all this could not result in any gain in biodiversity. The second planning authority report that supports our case is by your local plans policy officer, indeed for this very scheme. When she studied this proposal, she made some recommendations which appear to have been overridden. She asked, what alternatives have been considered? We do not know. 2, under biodiversity, she says the nature conservation officer must be involved. Please refer to comments by the nature conservation officer. What comments? There is nothing on the portal. For the previous application, the Nature Conservation Officer conditioned bat boxes, special bat lighting and bird boxes. The landscape team submissions only concern trees and not even the protected trees outside their site with their root protection radii within the construction areas. I can say more about the technical side of the plans, but thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Bickley. Any questions for Mr. Bickley? Yes, Councillor Lamb.
Thank you, Chair. And if I can commend you on your timing as well, that was exceptional. But thank you for your comments, which were very helpful. My question really is, what would you find acceptable on the site?
The houses are smaller and more in keeping with the area. Access that's suitable for that. There's been no exploration whatsoever of the potential. Is it Gledhow Rise, the road to the side of the Home Bargains that goes past there? There's been no consideration of using that for access, but instead this very narrow access road goes is proposed to between 29 and 31 Oakwell Mount, with masses of earth movement. It's a tight turning radius already for fire tenders and refuse vehicles, yet the Gledhow Rise is clearly suitable for articulated trucks bringing deliveries in for the supermarket. So the issue is, like, why has this not been considered? I mean, the plans, the planning policy officer actually questioned why about alternatives. So yes, we no, none of the neighbours are against housing. The country needs housing, but we need housing that is suitable and with the necessary amenity and with not this level of impact on our neighbourhood.
Do you want to come back, Councillor?
No, that was very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. I did see someone else raised a hand on this side. No? Yes.
Has there been any consultation by the developers with yourselves as local residents?
If you can switch your mic on, please, sir.
None whatsoever. We've been consistently ignored. We tried to make representations about the drains. There was no initial consultation. The first we heard about it was actually before there were postings on the lamppost. That came later. It's just a neighbour happened to spot people in yellow jackets on the site. So we've made representations through the planning channel. We've gone directly to the developers. We've tried to put things that actually would help the decision, like the one drawing we have for that shows the positions of the drains serving 25 to 29 Oakwell Mount. But this was sent by recorded delivery to the developers and then copied to various members of the planning officer and our councillor, but it was ignored. There was no representation. No, there was no response at all from the developers. And when it was posted on the planning portal, it was actually in fact listed as a planning objection by the land registry. So it rather concealed what was intended to be like a helpful nature, so it would actually identify the drains and incorporate those into the designs. So yeah, in short, it's not like we've been like shouting and being disruptive. We've tried to take our representations democratically through the planning process. But this, until my speech now, this has been basically ignored.
Thank you. Councillor Jenkins, you want to come back?
Yeah, just a sort of supplementary question, really. That access onto Oakwell Mount looks very narrow, and looking this morning when I visited, there was quite a lot of cars parked on Oakwell Mount. So, and also I can't really see very clearly any footpaths into the development. And it just seems to be quite a narrow exit, but also quite congested in terms of quite a lot of traffic coming down the hill. So I just don't know whether you think, in your opinion, the highways considerations been looked at, and whether there would need to be some double yellow lines maybe to prevent some parking, and whether that would affect local residents.
I think on this issue, I actually speak for the few neighbours who have actually supported the scheme. Well, one has actually posted a supportive comment, but it included the caveat but that highways issue is resolved. So parking issue is a major issue to both objectors and supporters of this scheme. And no, we don't think it's been adequately considered by highways. Yes, the access road is very narrow, and to maintain the minimum width for to be adopted, there is no footpath. Also, we're concerned about flood risk management, particularly on account of this access road. The flood risk management consultation report dated back to November last year. All calculations were submitted, and we've got no, it was fine. The flood risk management is, is a very competent person. However, since then, the design of the access road was radically changed to bring it up to adoptable standards. There is a concrete supporting structure on the south side of that access road to support the weight of vehicles, to stop the whole lot collapsing into the house into number 31. This is a substantial subterranean concrete structure, and can only have an effect on the sustainable drainage system that has been installed, the one you see through the cross section. Also concerns with the access road is, yes, we've got the supporting structure supporting number 31, but what about poor number 29, the access road goes right against their wall on the section. So the excavations are right up to their boundary. So there's the planning condition was that the designs of the access road were submitted were developed and submitted to a fuller stage than they would normally be for planning stage, and these major concerns of ours has not been addressed. The drainage which you mentioned that serves 25 to 29 is also understood to be routed under this access road. This is not shown on any drawing. And yet, yes, the response from the planning officer is, well, it will be underneath an adoptable highway at the end of the day, but it does not address the real concerns about what would happen to protect it or even identify it during the construction phase. So, and then back to the parking issue itself. Yes, yes, parking is a problem, and you rightly saw parking on the other side of Oakwell Mount when you visited the site today. The reason these are not residents who park there; they are the traders working in the shops and cafes on the Roundhay Road Parade. Which have got, there's no parking restrictions there. They obviously presently have a right to park there. But the reason they park there was because where they used to park before was cut off. What used to be the larger co-op car park that you saw on your site today would adequately accommodate parking for the whole neighbourhood, and then it was just fenced off, driving the workers to park their cars in side streets. So yes, Oakwell Mount has become congested, and the fact that the double yellow lines might be extended just beyond just to the up the hill from the access road does not address that. It's just going to push the problem further up the hill. So, to answer the question, it is a serious concern, and the highways proposal does not address these concerns.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at the houses the existing houses on Oakwell Mount. Number 27A 29. Are they detached houses? And if so, do you know how many bedroomed houses those ones are, existing ones?
The houses on Oakwell Mount are quite varied. They are all 2-storey. Some are semis, and the five houses, 25 to 29, including where I live, are more modern. They were built in 1986.
Do you happen to know if number 31 on the other side of the access? It looks like there's some sort of loft space accommodation there. They're quite high pitched. Am I correct there? Or
so could you? I'm sorry, I forgot, in my haste to get here, I forgot to put my hearing aids in.
Sorry.
So if you would press your button, I think it amplifies your
number 31.
Yeah.
It looks as though they're quite high pitched roofs. It looks as though there's some living accommodation in the roof. Is that correct? You know.
Some residents in the semis have had loft conversions, but it's not added to the overall height of their houses. But the heights are all of the original design.
Thank you.
Can't see anyone else hands up. So in that case, thank you very much, Mr. Bickley, for your time. Can I now ask the supporter to come on the table, please? Right, when you're ready, you've got 4 minutes between yourself. So whenever you're ready, please start the presentation.
Certainly. Thank you, Chair. My name is Andrew Windrus. I'm from ID Planning consultant for the application. There's David Whittaker, the applicant, to my left, and the resident from number 31 to my right, who will also speak. Just to be brief, as highlighted in the very detailed officer's report that we wholly support, the proposed development fully complies with the development plan, both national and local policies. The officer report confirms that the application has been subject to detailed discussions with officers for over a year to result in the scheme that is now recommended for approval. The proposals are acceptable with respect to their impact on the living conditions of both existing and local residents and the future residents. And it's a well laid out and designed scheme as covered by the officer report. Importantly, all technical consultees raised no objection. So there are no technical concerns, and there are further conditions added to the application to allow for more detail to come forward. And as already touched on, more detail has been provided than perhaps would be typical in this stage because of the nature of the application. The site is predominantly brownfield and in a sustainable location close to local amenities, including Roundhay Park. It provides much needed family housing and will provide a significant number of new additional trees that will in turn have biodiversity benefits. So in summary from myself, the officer's report robustly addresses all material planning considerations before concluding the application meets or exceeds all local and national policy.
My name is David Whittaker, and I'm one of the directors of the applicants who has made the planning application on the Oakwell Mount site. We are a small, local, Leeds-based, high-quality developer, and we have over the last 10 years or so successfully completed similar high-quality schemes in Oakwood, such as the one opposite the Montessori School on Wetherby Road in Oakwood, as well as off Devonshire Crescent in Roundhay, opposite the car park for St Andrew's United Reformed Church. Nearly all of the people who work with us or who are suppliers to us are based in the Leeds or the Leeds travel to work area. So we are a true local business employing local people, and we are a firm supporter of the city. I am also a local resident in Oakwood and have lived in the suburb for over 25 years and regularly use the Safeway supermarket, then subsequently the Co-op supermarket and now Home Bargains. So I believe I also have a reasonable knowledge of the area and the site concerned. Local residents will be aware that after that part of the car park closed, that there were difficulties with antisocial behaviour in the car park and illegal occupation by third parties, which necessitated eviction. The site was therefore fenced off by the co-op as it was in separate ownership than the Home Bargains car park. The site has now been derelict for approximately 6 years. As a local resident, I'm very keen to ensure that if our scheme is approved, we will seek to deliver a lasting, high-quality development fit for the area and also fit for local residents. I hope the committee recognise that this is a sensible and proportionate use of a derelict urban brownfield site, and I hope that you see fit to approve our planning application today. Many thanks for your time and attention. Thank you.
My name is Craig Hassel. With my husband, I own and live at number 31 Oakwell Mount, which is the one immediately downhill from the proposed access roads. Broadly speaking, I'm a pragmatist, and so I support this scheme as being better than the previous schemes that have been proposed behind our house, in particular the huge block of retirement flats. It's also considerably better than having to look out over a derelict half a supermarket car park. We've had concerns about the cutting down of the tree, of the support for the access road, and also for traffic. But as far as I can see, this is about enforcement. The conditions that are proposed are suitable, are sufficient to deal with those concerns that we have, as long as those conditions are enforced. You can paint double yellow lines all the way up the street if you like, but people will still park on them unless the parking restrictions are enforced. They are not being at the moment. That is the concern, the principal concern that we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Stevenson and then Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, we heard from the speaker earlier a question around access to the site. Could you let us know whether you have explored alternative access and what the limitations are, if so?
Yeah, obviously the point, I think, if I understand it, is whether we could come in off the Home Bargains car park rather than coming in off Oakwell Mount. That wouldn't be the case. It's obviously a fully operational car park leased to Home Bargains, and it's private land. So the only access that is available to this site is via the land off Oakwell Mount, which the co-op bought about 40 years ago in anticipation that something would happen in this regard. There is no ability for us as a private third party to force Home Bargains or indeed the separate owner of that site to come in off it.
If I can, but have you attempted to open negotiations with the landowner to see if that will be possible?
Well, we have had a brief discussion, but on a commercial basis, I would imagine if we went to Home Bargains and said, we've got this great idea, please can we come across your private car park and put a private access road in and serve 8 houses off it, I think you can probably guess, as I could guess, what the answer would be.
Do you want to come back, Councillor Stevenson? Councillor Taylor?
Yeah, I've heard from the previous speaker that you haven't consulted any of the residents. I was wondering, did you consult the local ward councillors? You've got this in planning over a year, you said you've been planning to do this work. And you and I know that communication is very vital. So I think that if you did speak to the local residents and get both sides, probably we wouldn't be in this sticky. But so did you speak to the local councillors to let them know what you were doing, what you're not going to do, and have any open meetings with the local resident? 31 agreed, supported, and he gave the vital reason why, which I've got no problem with that. But maybe if you did sit with the other resident, you would see way forward. Yeah.
There have been 2 separate pre-applications with Leeds City Council on this site to discuss the principle of development, one by the co-op in about 2018 and one by ourselves in 2020. So we have attempted to do that. Obviously, COVID has not helped the situation here in terms of consultation. You're quite right. Normally, what we would probably do, we would probably sort of book the local hall and invite people down and say, look, we've got a planning application. Do you want to come down and discuss it? That has clearly not been possible for us to do. And I think I'm right in saying factually that this is classed as a minor application at 9 units. So it's under the threshold for consultation. We certainly wouldn't have a problem doing it, but hopefully I can beg the committee's understanding that in this instance, due to COVID, it's just not been possible.
I know we all blame COVID, but Zoom did kick in very early and into COVID. And the ward councillors would be you go between the local residents at the time. If you wanted to really reach the resident, you could speak to the local ward councillors. And especially I would speak to number 29, where the road, because that resident going to have more effect, living there, and just place yourself and that resident. How would you feel? I think you should communicate even with that particular resident next door.
We have, through officers, engaged with Councillor Lisa Martin, and then David has directly again in more recent time. And yes, certainly going forward, obviously the construction of the site will require close engagement with the neighbouring parties, through sharing of detail in terms of any construction detail, again, as it gets into that final level of detail, and then also the usual hours that the council would impose in terms of construction hours, and actually just keeping regularly updated from there on.
Thank you. Councillor Flint.
Thank you. It was helpful to go to the site this morning and actually see the space. These are being billed as family homes, and we were looking at the kind of garden size, and the two houses at the end have got substantially less flat garden space. I think is it like 2 meters, and it looks like the rest of the garden is sort of very inaccessible for people. And I was sort of struggling to work like how a family would use that space. I'm wondering if there's any maneuver to make that space a little bit bigger. It just seems, if you're saying that they're family houses, that's not a very usable space for a young family. And then my other question about that is, like, the main issue really seems to be the access road, and I can see that surveys still need to be done, but wondering what kind of reassurance you can give to the people at 29. They've got a pretty open fence at the side, and there's talk of like a little buffer, but how that is going to impact their house and their garden, and just what detailed reassurance can you give that you've taken that into account?
If we take your last point first, in terms of the residents the left hand side, I mean the access road is close to the property, but of course the actual road itself will be founded on its own supporting foundation, so there will be no impact or influence on the adjoining property in terms of pressure or loading. The loading down will go down through the road, not laterally off to 29. But you're right. I mean, obviously that property is close and the garden is close, and certainly our intention would be to sit down with the residents in the event that our planning application is successful, and perhaps see whether we can agree, a revised fencing treatment at our cost, if they were so interested to improve that aspect. So that's something we'd be very happy with, and I think I'm right in saying that the fencing is to be conditioned as part of the application. So we would be very amenable to that. I think it would make a lot of sense all around, both in terms of amenity. In answer to your first point about the gardens in 7 and 8, yes, they are smaller. We've done similar schemes in the past, and we tend to find that the profile of people who buy them is different each time. And some people want big gardens, they've got children, they want a place to play out. Other people, they're away a lot, or they're not interested in gardening, or they're more elderly and they don't want as much space. And we tend to find that some people are interested in larger gardens, and some people are interested in just a patio area to sit out on. And it's not always the case that everyone wants a big garden. That's certainly our experience.
No, I mean, I'm not much of a garden myself, but I can manage more than like a 2 meter space. You could barely get like 2 deck chairs on there. It's just not, it doesn't seem like very usable space. And I get that, you're near the park and there's other space, but it's just wondering if there's, if that is it, or is it, could you relook at the space to give people, even an extra meter or so?
All the gardens are well in excess of the council's adopted policies, and even those ones for 7 and 8 are much larger flat areas than 2 meters. Of course, they're up at 7 and 8 meters, as with the ones on the side. So they have a patio area and then the flat area, and then the area in the more planted area in 7 and 8 certainly is still flatter, unlike the other slightly steeper ones. I mean, ever since I started working on it, and I live locally and I'm just in the process of moving house, I thought my kids would love it on here and I'd never get them out of the woodland areas up at the top, and you'd be getting them out of there. And that would be difficult. So as David has touched on, it's something which it meets all the policies. It does provide something different. And there are those flat areas as a minimum anyway. We've looked at particularly that part of the site quite a lot, and you will recall there were 9 houses. It's been brought in to give more space in and around there, which again has just released some of the space in that area while still allowing for all the turning and parking. So that's where there's probably not scope to move 7 and 8 any further because of some of those parking and highway requirements. And just touching on the access road, obviously that fully meets the council's adoptable standards and has been designed in that basis.
Councillor Sharp and then Councillor Jenkins.
Thanks, Chair. In relation to the access from Oakwell Mount, is there not any scope to put a footpath along the side of number 31? I mean, obviously there's access for cars, but there'll be people on foot that might want to go to the shop or school or wherever if it's families.
So we have had one on there before. The highways officers asked us to widen the road to ease the passing there. And again, this complies with access requirements for shared services in that sense, because it's very likely traffic just been for 8 houses. So we did, under the private drive arrangement, have a pathway on the side. So the highways officers preferred to have the wider actual vehicle route in that sense, complying with that. I'm sure Lisa will be able to clarify the type and the standard. This one exactly is, I can't remember the definition. So something which was on there, we felt there was enough in terms of having a passing place for cars. So it was more a single vehicle route with passing places and a footpath, but the highways officers wanted that wider highway route in that sense.
You okay with that, Councillor Sharp? Councillor Jenkins?
Yeah, I think 3 points. One is about history. So there is a sign there that says it's still cooperative land by the access in the access road. So if that was 40 years ago, I just wonder what the history was, as why the co-op bought that land, if you like, to add it into the car park, and whether it was ever used as a road or whatever. So that's a bit of history, I suppose, and whether it means anything, I don't know. The second point really is about footpaths, that if these are family houses and they're likely to be children, those children are, susceptible to potential heavy traffic or some traffic in that area. And I would have thought that was a road safety issue. And thirdly is about climate change. Now, we're going to be in a fuel poverty situation or fuel crisis situation until 2024 at least. And I can't understand why these are houses that look to be south facing, I think, why there's no solar panels, what sort of ground source heating you intend to employ, and whether these are going to be airtight properties. Perhaps you could answer those questions. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, they're all really good questions in terms of, current climate issues, really. But the houses themselves are effectively east facing, they're not south facing. So the solar gain from them will be much less in that regard. Solar panels, yeah, we would be sympathetic to them. We could look at them, certainly. Again, the orientation, we'd have to check and see whether it's possible. It's not something we put on a planning application, but we could certainly look at it if that was something that was substantive from our point of view.
Jenkins, you want to come back?
There were a couple of others, if you want. One was about the co-op.
I'm not sure you've answered. I'm not sure you've answered all the questions, but still, what was it about the history?
So there's one about the co-op history. I certainly don't know. But again, apart from being a local resident, it was their car park. Then they closed it. I don't know any more than that. In respect to the footpaths, I suppose my earlier comments about, yes, we designed it to have both, but then we're asked to widen the actual highway and do it of a, I've got type 3B in my head, but again, I'm sure officers will confirm as to that. Is that right? To confirm exactly how that's designed in terms of its shared type arrangement for both pedestrians and vehicles. But that's what we were asked to design it on the basis of and change our original design. Climate change, it's not of a threshold to require the details of the council's policies, the EN1 and EN2, but certainly something by condition. Of course, we can explore, what measures can be going in. We know there's the whole shift away from gas boilers and putting in air source heat pumps, that type of thing coming in I think it's the next 2 or 3 years. So they're all things that we certainly consider by condition if necessary.
Thank you. Councillor Stevenson.
Just a quick question, Chair, to the resident at number 31. In terms of the site as it sits today, what's your experience of living next to that sort of redundant site? Do you have antisocial behaviour and such
Yes.
like?
Yeah, there are often cars that arrive in the middle of the night. We do have an attic. The loft is converted. That's where I sit and work on an evening, preparing for the next day. There are often cars that come in there, and then another car will pull in next to it for a few seconds and then drive away again. You can all guess what's going on there. Just over the last couple of weeks, someone has been dumping food waste on that side of the car park, so that we've had huge flocks of seagulls and kites flying around, interested in whatever the person on the bike has been throwing over the fence. And I lived there, and it was me that reported to the council when the travellers arrived shortly before Home Bargains opened. And obviously the council had to expend some energy and funds, no doubt, on having them sent on their way. So it's not ideal, and that's why I opened with I consider that this is a better option either than the huge block of retirement flats, or continuing to look at half of a derelict supermarket car park.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your time. And now shall we move on to the questions to officers? Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. It's just about point 94 on page 35 of the report, and the wildlife and the woodland behind the houses. So I just wondered who'd actually considered whether the proposal would affect any protected wildlife, if there is any protected wildlife there, if that's been established, and is there anything we can do to protect any further development of that woodland, so that obviously it would be privately owned. I know obviously it's not flat land, so you probably couldn't build on it, but there may be overdevelopment that homeowners may want to cut it down, cut it back, which could then impact on the wildlife there. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Midgley. Yeah, there is a condition 9, it's just a headline, which talks about landscape management plan, but we'd expect as part of that, the management of those garden spaces, details of how they're going to be managed to be submitted. But I take your point about it's very difficult to control what a resident of the house might want to do with their own patch of land. But that's probably as best as we can do is look at measures and see how that message can be passed on to future owners of the property. In terms of the biodiversity, the applicant did submit a biodiversity report, and we did have the preview on the 2019 application. The comments that were submitted was by our nature conservation officer to fall back on. I think essentially at the present time, the view was taken with this site that because a large part of it's hard standing, that counts against the biodiversity quality it has. The the lighting also would count against will make it unlikely for species such as bats to frequent there. In not saying they wouldn't, but it makes it less likely. Plus, there's no watercourses or anything like that, which would encourage other species, potentially some protected species, and the diversity of wildlife. It's more likely that they're going to be matters of a lot of bird life in the woods and those sort of things. What we could do, because I do take the point, is that we could add a condition to, if members are minded to grant planning permission, to require details of the scheme for measures to be agreed to achieve a biodiversity net gain to be submitted. And that may also include things like the introduction of bat boxes and bird boxes and the like. The other thing I would say is that there is substantial new planting to take place, which we thought would increase the variety of habitat as well, and the habitat resource generally, and the variety of the habitat. So that's where we've come to the conclusion, or why we've come to the conclusion, that we think that there'll be a net gain. But I take your point. I think it would be a good idea to add such a condition on.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 4 questions. One actually follows on from Councillor Midgley's point about sort of future proofing and just understanding what permitted development rights would be in place, and particularly around the amenity and what conditions we can. I've got a concern that in pretty much every case the households would be taking responsibility immediately for some very mature trees with TPOs, and knowing what I'm sure all our caseworks are like, you're quickly going to be knocking on the doors and getting people asking what they can do about them, and so on, just making sure what conditions are in place are really clear, and also around paraphernalia and what other built structures would be acceptable or not. So that's one aspect. I wanted to ask about, David referred to this being within the defined town centre boundary, and as a point of principle, I'm a little concerned that in an area where there is housing growth generally, we're actually shrinking the potential location for services and shops and things like that. If I've understood what you said correctly, I'd be grateful if someone could comment on refuse collection and bins, which is a concept. It looks very tight to me. Again, it feels like a casework problem being built in to start with. Where are people going to wheel their bins out to if all of the visitor parking spaces are full? How's a refuse truck going to get in? We're expecting people to wheel it to the end of what looks a pretty busy and congested road. So what's the plan for that? And the final question is, I didn't really feel we got an answer from the applicant about what officers have done to explore whether an access is feasible from the road that runs into the existing car park. Because if it's doable, it seems more preferable to do that. And it didn't seem like it had been, imagining what somebody might say if you ask them is very different to asking them and hearing what they actually said. So I don't know if officers have done any work on that. David?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you, Councillor. Yeah, in terms of conditions and the land to the rear, I don't think we've got one on which controls permitted development rights, but yeah, you're right. It's probably a good idea to put something on which will restrict the building of outbuildings and that sort of thing. The other thing that we could potentially put on, which might help with the biodiversity point also, is about external lighting. I referred to the car park lighting, and we all know that those sort of very bright security lights you sometimes get flicking on and off can discourage wildlife. So we can certainly look at that. In terms of the future management, we can put a condition on which will require a scheme of measures to be submitted, and that could in theory include or require the applicant to submit to us details of the information that they're going to provide to potential purchasers and homeowners as well, and about the limitations in terms of the usage of that land. And there might be something that we can do to reinforce that in terms of a physical reinforcement, in terms of creating picket style fences maybe and gates to define the area where you're going into the woodland, as it were, and have that sort of nature area to sort of reinforce that message. So they're all things that we could probably do. I suspect, moving on to the town centre boundary, I suspect that was just a historic thing because it was the car park to the shop, to the retail units as such. From a planning point of view, I suppose the question that we would ask ourselves is, okay, in those circumstances, is a residential development in principle acceptable in planning policy terms? And yes, it is. And I think we would say on that basis, because of the location of it to the rear as the retail frontage, we wouldn't think that that would inhibit or adversely impact upon the vitality and the viability of the retail centre as a whole, just from the nature of the location. I'll let Lisa deal with the issue about refuse collection and bins. From the access from Gledhow Rise, I haven't personally been involved in any discussions on the application, but I'm not aware that we've raised that as an issue. I suspect during the course of the application, we simply concentrated on what was put before us and whether that was an appropriate and suitable access. But as I say, I haven't been involved in the negotiations, so I can't say with certainty whether that matter was explored or not.
So your question about refuse, the road layout internally has been designed so a refuse vehicle can enter and turn within the site. And that was part of our requirement of the way that, you know, we asked from the original layout to be revised, because I think there were concerns that the original layout refuse would have to be from Oakwell Mount, and there was no, you know, then there'd have to be a collection point on Oakwell Mount. We thought that was not acceptable. That would cause a lot of problems in terms of those number of bins, and therefore we asked for it to be designed so refuse could enter the site and turn within the site. And the turning head at this, you know, just at the end of the access road has been designed on that basis. Just in terms of the question about an alternative access, I don't think the site as shown meets the adopted highway boundary. I don't have the information on where the adopted highway extends, but I'd imagine that the road round to the back of, you know, to the Home Bargains car park is privately owned. I hope that answers your question.
Councillor Lamb.
If I can just come back, but the point is we don't know. So nobody, either the applicant or officers, are able to answer the question definitively if it is possible to achieve an access in that location. That's clear. And then just back to the refuse vehicle, is it dependent, is the turning in dependent on it being free of parked cars and is anything proposed to achieve that?
Yes, there will be TROs along that access road and the turning head to prevent any parking within that, to keep that clear for larger vehicle turning. And also on Oakwell Mount, that is why the TROs are extended to allow vehicles to safely access the new development.
Thank you. Councillor Sharp.
Thanks, Chair. I think you might have just half answered my question, Lisa. It was in relation to the footpath. So is that the reason why the refuse? Right, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Flint.
Thanks, Chair. I was just wondering if you could clarify what's meant in the recommendation that, with the details of fences and boundary treatment and what that refers to. So just thinking about the fence that goes alongside the car park is like a really long boundary, and I think you said that is going to be a hedge, but then there's kind of questions around who would maintain that. Could people just sort of cut through the hedge to go to the shop? Does it make sense to put a path there? Like, because it's so long, like to look at it would be, you know, it's just a long hedge or fence. Is there a way to make that kind of more interesting and diverse? And who would be responsible for on the access road, the sort of buffer and planting? Is that then for residents to upkeep or not?
Okay, yeah, thank you, Councillor Flint. The condition number 6 details of fences and boundary treatment is a sort of a catch-all, as it were. So it will deal with the fences or boundary treatments for the back gardens of the properties and between gardens of properties. It would also catch, yes, the boundary treatment between the site and the car park. It is shown to be a hedge. I think also there's supposed to be a fence which runs alongside that, which would serve to protect the hedge and stop people from cutting through. It is a long stretch of hedge. There are a couple of extra heavy standard trees which are proposed to be planted in amongst it, which will serve to break it up a little bit. It's difficult to do too much with that because that's where the visitor parking is also located. So that would prevent, well, we could reduce the number of visitor parking to break up that hedge line a bit more with more landscaping, because I think that's probably the only way that we could do it. But it's just a trade-off between whether it's the visitor parking or the hedging. There is a point though that I think would be sensible, and you touched upon it and when you were talking about the rear gardens as well, that the details of the retaining structures should probably also be submitted for approval, because we do have a number of retaining structures in back gardens and we want those to look appropriate as well.
Okay with that, Councillor Flint?
Just about the buffer bit on the access road, is what would that involve? And yeah.
Yeah, I think out on site, I said I thought it would probably that would fall with the developer, but I'm not sure. Would it go in the public highway? Would it be the council's responsibility there, Lisa?
At the moment, it's not within the proposed adopted highway boundary. I noticed that there is a landscape management plan conditioned. So my understanding is at the moment that those would need to engage a management company, to manage that piece of landscaping and the hedge and those trees, that we haven't got any of those within the highway boundary as proposed.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens.
3 questions, I think, if I take one at a time. Moving on from the point about that boundary hedge between the 2 car parks, it concerns me. There's a suggestion of a fence, given the antisocial behaviour that was referred to earlier and other issues, and I can see very quickly how that becomes an issue of air maintenance. Over time, that wood's going to dilapidate. There will no doubt be some teens at some point that try and smash through that or set fire to it or something. And I wondered, actually, for aesthetics, it might look a lot better if we had a wall down there. So I built a wall with the planting in front, and then perhaps like a birdmouth fence, and then you've got your visitor car parking, which might perhaps finish off the whole thing quite nicely rather than just a wooden fence. Is there an opportunity within that, the discussions around the conditions for boundary treatments, to have a look at that if we haven't already?
Short answer is yes. Yeah. Thank you for the ideas.
Okay. That was very nearly a comment, Chair, so you'll let me get away with that. I'm a bit concerned around plot 1 when we talked about that 7-metre flat patio and then a 3-metre wall and then a very steep incline. 7 metres is quite a distance, that, in terms of the patio. And I wondered, is there an opportunity to reduce that and have less of an incline and that 3-metre wall? And part of the reason I wonder that, it's probably going to be very dark around there because of the trees. So you're going to have a big 7-metre flat area of space that's probably going to have no sunlight. So how far is it usable? So is there an opportunity to bring that back and reduce the incline, or does that not work?
Okay, if I can answer that with reference to the slides. Lewis, is it possible to put up first slide number, let's go for slide number 17, please. All right, okay, sorry, yeah, my slides reference is slightly different, but this, yeah, this will do. Swap glasses. All right, so we've got plot 1 there. We've got north facing there, so the sun will move around, very broadly speaking, from, as we know, from east to west. So the flat area is essentially that area there. So they will get the suns from just gone midday, I suppose, depending on the time of year, into the evening. They'll be impacted by these trees here, new planting there, but the new planting we're looking at in that location is going to be what we would call residential friendly. So it'll be trees like silver birches, rowan, hornbeams, that sort of trees that are more acceptable within sort of a domestic setting. The big existing trees around here, so in terms of direct sunlight, they won't really have an impact until later on, late evening. So that's the sort of the circumstance, as it were. If we now, Lewis, sorry, could we go on to the cross section, which I have as. Oh, okay, 26. That's helpful. Thank you. Yeah, great. Thank you. So, plot 1 is this top one. What's not clearly shown on this, and this is the limiting factor, is the root protection area for the existing trees just sits behind, just off that retaining wall. So it would be very difficult. We wouldn't really want to regrade the land in that area because we're going to start interfering with the roots, and we wouldn't really want to push that wall much further back either, because then we're going to start getting entwined in the roots as well. You could in theory bring the wall, yes, you could in theory bring the wall forward, but I think the way that it's been negotiated is just to maximize the level area out the back. So yeah, if you brought it forward, it would have the benefit of reducing the retaining structure, but it's just playing that off against the benefit of the wider, flatter area, as it were.
My final question, and Chair, when I was looking at slide 4, just as the aerial view, I was thinking about density and some of the comments that were made by residents. Have we at any point done a sort of an overlaying map to see whether, I'm looking at the spread of properties here, so it would be 29 downwards on the left. To me, at that angle, it looks like if you picked up those properties and put them at a 90-degree angle on the site, it would more or less be a similar sort of density in terms of where we are, which pointed to the question I asked earlier about the houses that are in situ. Have we done that? I know there's a paragraph in here on housing mix, but in terms of density, is it fair to say that actually what's going to go on that site is pretty same as a density of the ones that were built in the 80s here?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's the same as ones which are built in the 80s. I think the density of the development has been a determining, the spatial characteristics of the development have been determinative of the form and the density that's happened. To meet our policies, we would end up, in terms of our density policies, 30 dwellings per hectare, we would have ended up with a much denser scheme. And to be fair, we probably would never going to achieve that anyway, because the nature of the slope and the woodland, etc., when you have a look at that. But the spatial pattern of the dwellings certainly tries to pick up, or certainly reflects, some of the more historic nature of that particular locality, and it is that sort of garden suburb type affair. In terms of the scale and the 3-storey, whilst we're on this slide, we do have some 3-storey developments out the back there with the flats, which is a more modern development. There are 3-storey, 4-storey developments along the parade as well. And actually it's out of shot here, but there are some terraces here, which are 3-storey, which are Victorian Edwardian terraces. So there is a precedent for buildings of that scale in this location.
Right, can I now, yeah, is that a question, yeah?
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one. Just following on from Councillor Stevenson's point about the retaining wall on plot number 1. It's 3 metres high, and I'm just thinking that potentially will be a family garden. Is there any safety issues around the height of that retaining wall if smaller children can gain access to it? Is it a steep drop or? Thank you.
Yeah, we haven't really sort of got into those details, but the way that we might cover it off, that particular point is, you know, we talked about, I think it's an answer to the question that Councillor Lamb gave about defining the edge of the garden, as it were, to the woodland area that falls within the garden using a fence, and that might serve a dual purpose in that respect. Yeah.
Councillor Jenkins.
Yeah, sorry. So just about, I think, without making a comment, the access road is quite critical. So one of the issues, it seemed to me, is that access for the waste wagons, has it been in discussion with the waste management? Maybe this has to happen subsequently, but whether you can actually have smaller waste wagons going down some of the smaller roads rather than the large ones, which might be more appropriate in this case, and whether that would then enable perhaps a footpath to be instigated.
I mean, I can only go on what's already been discussed. And generally, I think the waste wagons that the council use, they'll cover off an area all at once. So it might be difficult to use different sizes for specific areas. I don't know. I'm not involved. But in terms of the lack of footway, the development is a small cul-de-sac of 8 dwellings, and our design guidance, there is that, for the sort of shared surface street, it is, specifically for cul-de-sacs up to 10 dwellings where we wouldn't require a footway, because the vehicle movements are, it's a short cul-de-sac, so vehicle movements are considered to be, relatively low and slow speed as well. And it would be, designed, as a block paved surface so that it feels like it's not, that vehicle movement shouldn't predominate.
And just finally from me, there is no access to the shopping area there's no gated access. And I just wondered whether that was, in terms of like health and safety, again, you'd feel quite closed in without that possibility of an alternative. I'm not thinking about a fire or anything like that, but I mean, or maybe I am, but perhaps that does need to be some emergency way of getting through. And also, if you're living there, you'd think, well, you should be able to get through without having to go right down to Oakwell Mount.
Would you want to respond to this? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, we can certainly explore if members wanted to. I feel slightly uncomfortable that we'd be creating an access onto what in effect is land in private ownership rather than onto public land, because although it is used by the public, the car park, that would be the position that we're in, and it would also be opening on directly into car parking spaces as well. So it might be difficult to achieve unless we can find, somewhere along that boundary where there's an open space, but we can certainly explore that.
Right, thank you. Do any member have any comments? Councillor Lamb?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, well, I think my view is we're halfway to a good scheme, but I feel like we're building in problems if we're not careful, and I'm certainly not comfortable. I don't think I'm in a place to say, no, I'd refuse permission, but I also don't think I'm in a place to say, right, I'm ready to defer and delegate to officers. I think it would benefit massively from the involvement of local residents and the ward members, as Councillor Taylor alluded to at the beginning. And I really don't accept that in the last 12 months, the developer couldn't have found a way to engage with the local community. And I think their input and that of the local members would help to resolve a lot of the issues that are there. The issues to me are around the access, and I'd want to know definitively that there is no other option that could be explored. I think if you had an access at the other end, if that was possible, it doesn't seem to me it would be too difficult to flip the scheme almost on its head to make it work. So there's that. I'm concerned about the access that's proposed and whether actually the impact that will have on current residents. Concerned about the other things we talked about, but I'd feel much more comfortable knowing local people had an input, and that we went with the principle that the developers should be working with the community to deliver this, not doing something to them. So my proposal would be that we defer this for a couple of cycles, ask the developers to engage properly with the local community and local members, with the planners, look at these issues and see what can be done, and then come back to us and hopefully have a scheme that's better for the developer, better for the residents that are going to live there in the future, and has much less of an impact on the existing residents.
Councillor Taylor and then Councillor Stevenson.
Chair, I never thought I would agree with Councillor Lamb, but 100%, I totally agree with Councillor Lamb every word he says. Thank you.
Councillor Stevenson.
I'm going to make a slight suggestion in the tweak. I think there is an avenue to explore on access, because we didn't have an adequate answer, I'm afraid. I think the answer I was given from the applicant was, you can imagine what the conversation is. Well, it's not my job to imagine, it's your job to ask the question, and you haven't. So I think they should be going back and looking at that point. Boundary treatments as well, we clearly need to address that through relevant conditions. And on PD rights as well, one minor thing, the garages. So would it be permitted development to extend the garage either forward or upwards? And if not, if that is permitted development, we should probably seek to restrict that, if that's the case. But the slight tweak was going to be just to save our time, if nothing else, that I think I would probably be mindful to defer and delegate this to the Around Here ward members in consultation. So it's what we did recently on an application in Collingham, which was very successful for us. Because the Round Here ward members can then work with residents and with the applicant to try and iron out some of these things with officers. And if at that stage the Round Here ward members are happy for it to be deferred to officers to approve, then that's fine. But if they feel like it needs to come back to plans panel, they can make that judgment for us. So that would be a slight tweak I'd make.
Thank you, Councillor Ray.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think just listening to the comments, I think we're all pretty much in agreement that the principle is there, that this is a reasonable site. It just needs to be better than it is. And I think I don't know who to agree with on whether it should go to ward members or come back to panel. I think in either respect, I think we all agree that, like I say, in principle, this is better than what is there, but it could be better than what is presented. And I think it's a couple of cycles back is probably what we're looking at. But I do think it should, just for clarity purpose, should come back to panel, because I think that's a clearer and simpler process. And I'm not quite sure we can really do that other way quite legally. But anyway, legal office seems to agree.
Councillor Stevenson, thank you. So we've got two competing motions, essentially. We've got a motion to defer, to explore the matters that Councillor Lamb has said to bring back to panel. And then Councillor Stephen, you said defer, explore these issues and defer it to ward members to determine those final issues, and then defer to the Chief Planning Officer for approval.
That's correct. What we did in Collingham, but as there's a consensus across the side,
Yeah,
I'll
I
withdraw
would-
my part of this point.
Okay, thank you. So is that formally withdrawn? Okay, I won't have to give legal advice on that point then. Okay, thank you, Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you, Nikki. Right, Councillor Jenkins.
Can I just add that we could ask the Nature Conservation Officer to have another look at the plans?
Right, are there any other comments before I bring David for to sum it up? No, David?
Okay, thank you, Chair. It looks as though we're moving towards a deferral of consideration of the application and report back to plans panel at a future date for determination. This would be due to allow for consultation with local residents and local members, particularly points on the access, whether there is an alternative access that can be achieved off Gledhow Rise, and also to discuss with the impact of the current access arrangements as proposed, if they're to remain on that, as part of the proposal with neighbours, to see if the neighbours' concerns could be addressed. And if that's the case, then we would report back on what measures have been agreed to. Look at that. Pick up on Councillor Jenkins' point about consulting with nature conservation. And then we would also pick up on the points raised by members during the course of the discussion in terms of conditions about details of retaining structures to rear gardens, details of sustainable design measures, and we may be able to bring some further information back to plans panel as part of the discussions. Woodland garden management in terms of how that's going to be achieved, and defining the woodland boundary by a fence, taking out permitted development rights for outbuildings, and restrict powers to put up lighting, as it were, and also pick up on the point about extensions. So we've got small gardens, so therefore we should restrict rights in terms of extensions to the houses. So we'd cover that as well. And add a condition which would tie in with Councillor Jenkins' point about diversity net gain. So details of measures to submit to demonstrate they're actually going to achieve that.
Thank you. Based on the summary provided, does someone wants to move the motion? Councillor Councillor Lamb, seconded by Councillor Taylor. Could we now take the vote on the motion as proposed and seconded for anyone anyone for? Against? Abstentions? It's carried. So thank you very much. Right, item 9, date and the time of the next meeting will be Thursday, the 25th of August, 2022 at 1:30 p.m. Now that concludes the today's business. Thank you everyone for attending, and we had a really good debate. So next time, hopefully, it should not take that long. But I gave you all the opportunity as much as I could have done. So thank you.